Hey everybody, this is a short Cinema 4D tutorial that goes over Volume Builder for 3D printing. All right, so since I'm going to be 3D printing some models, the first thing I want to do is set up my project that will fit the 3D printer. So most 3D printers are going to work with a volume that's roughly about 200 by 200 by 200 millimeters, within that range of some sort. So I'm going to start out by setting up my project to do so in millimeters. Now, if it's not already, you simply need to go up to Edit, Preferences, and find Units. And here we want to make sure that our unit display is millimeters, which it is. That's good. If it's inches, change it to millimeters and close it out. Next we're going to hit Command D, and that's going to bring up our project settings here. Here you want to make sure we're under millimeters as well. And what I'm going to do with this is just, instead of 1 millimeter, I'm going to hit 0.1 millimeters and hit enter. All right. And what that's going to do is going to scale our project down to millimeters so that when we bring in a primitive object like this, it's relatively small. So this is starting out at 200 millimeters, just under an inch. An inch is about 25.4 millimeters. So this is a good scale for us to work with. Our 3D printer bed is about 200 by 200 by 200 millimeters. So if we work within that scale to begin with, it'll be much easier. All right, so let's talk about volume building. What volume building can do for us is we can take primitive objects and use them in different ways to create much more complex forms. So let's start out with something like a sphere. Go to primitive models. I'm going to bring in a sphere, and I am just going to simply first change the segments to a little bit higher. So from 24 segments to 180. I'll get into what that means later. I'm going to take the sphere, copy it, Command C, Command V, Command V. I've got 3 spheres now, and I'm just going to take one over here, and I'm going to take another one over here, and then I'm going to go to my volume builder. So here's the volume builder right here. Click this in, and just simply take these 3 and drop them inside. Now, when you do that, you're going to see that there's this real pixelization. It almost looks like there's a bunch of building blocks making up the form. And so what the volume builder does is it approximates the structure of just the exterior. And for 3D printing, that's really important. You just want the outside form so that the slicer can make up the structure on the inside without having crossing geometry and other difficult things to print. So what I'm going to do with this, because it does look a little pixelated, I'm going to go to my radius. So if you click on Volume Builder, the voxel size, I have 1 millimeter right now. I'm just going to change this to 0.25. That's going to give me a bit more smooth modeling of what I'm looking for. Now the cool thing about the Volume Builder is when you're in this mode of the hierarchy, you have the bottom sphere, which in this case is my middle one, and then the 2 above it. So in the Volume Builder menu, down in the Object Manager, or I'm sorry, in the Attributes Manager, you can select either Union or Subtract. So I'm going to do Subtract on this one and Subtract on this one. And notice already this gives us a much more complicated model, which is really interesting. So with this, I can start adding more and more things to it. So for example, maybe I want to bring in the torus. And the torus, let's see, I'll choose Z plus, and then I'm going to reduce this down to radius here. Okay, that looks pretty good. So bring the torus in as well. It becomes a part of the model. It could be like this, which looks pretty interesting. Or I can again subtract it. And now I'm getting, again, much more complicated model form. So you can keep going with this in multiple different ways to create highly interesting, complicated forms. I'm just going to, well, let's just bring in another torus because that's kind of an interesting form. Make this a little more complicated. So I'm going to reduce this down. And this time I'm just going to rotate a little bit to give it some asymmetry. And again, drop this in. And again, subtract it. All right, so now I've got really interesting, much more complicated form. And again, the more and more you do with this, the more intricate and interesting your forms can be. By adding, subtracting, copy, paste, repeat, can give you really complex forms. Now, the other thing that's cool about this is we can make intersecting parts. So just as an example, let's say I wanted to create a base. Just bring the cube, bring this down, all right? And I'm going to keep the base pretty simple. I'm just going to add a little bit of a fillet to the base, give it some rounding. Maybe instead of 4 millimeter for the radius, I'll just give it 2, okay? And then I'm going to step this down maybe just to 1 so it gets a bit more geometry there. So with this then, I can also give it a volume builder, bring that cube in there. And then maybe with that as well, bring this down to 0.25. And finally, I'm going to give it a little bit of a, what do I want here? I guess I'll just give it a cylindrical base. All right, shrink this down, make it a little bit wider, bring it down here for the base of the bottom. Let's see, caps. We'll do fillet caps on those as well. Give it a little more interest and add this into the volume builder. So now I've got this base pediment. The last thing I do with this cylinder is have more rotation segments, 72 to make it a little bit more smooth curve. You'll see the pixelization goes away a little bit more there. I'm just going to bring it down a little bit more too. Like that is more interesting. Okay, so I've got my base for my sculpture. I've got the pediment, and now I've got the sculpture. And the last thing I'm going to do is just add a little connector. So I'll print this base separate, I'll print the sculptural piece separate, and then I'll make a connector that I'll print separate as well. So I have 3 pieces that I'll connect together to build this form. So to do that, I'm just going to grab a cylinder. I am going to reduce this down in its diameter, also in its height, okay? And this is going to be the connector that goes into the base and into the sculpture. So I can print these separately so they can hover above, almost like some sort of Lego building block kind of piece. So I'm just going to take this and I'm going to make the radius 1 millimeter. Okay, so it's pretty even there. And then I'm just going to copy this and paste it. And what we want to do with this is eventually get everything to be on the ground level. For right now, I'm not going to worry too much about it, but I'm going to take this pasted one. I'm just going to move it over here for now. Okay, so that's going to be the positive piece that I connect into these. And then I want to make a negative out of those other 2 pieces that I can fit them all together. So I'll take this one, which is the original. And with this one, you want to make sure that if this peg right here that I created is 1 millimeter, if I make the hole exactly 1 millimeter too, it's never going to fit. The tolerances are way too close. So what we want to do with this first one is actually make it a little bit bigger. So I'm just going to make this 1.5 millimeters just to give it a little bit more width so that that piece will definitely fit in. You can always use a little bit of super glue if you're 3D printing to get them to connect. All right, so I've got this one. I'm just going to bring this into the volume builder here. This is the base, all right? And notice that it's connected. I'm just going to go to volume builder and make this a subtraction, okay? So now I've got a hole right here that eventually this peg that I print will fit into there. And I want to do the same thing for this top model. Now remember, with these models, you can always hide them. So if you double click on this little button on the top, that'll disappear. It's not gone, it's just hidden. So the same thing I'm going to do with this here. I'm going to copy this, Command C, Command V. I'm going to take this cylinder and bring it down into this volume builder, which is the sculpture. And the same thing is true with this one. I'm just going to go to volume builder and subtract that as well. So now I should have a hole in that one. Not much of a hole, so I am going to raise it up a little bit higher into that form. so that there's definitely a hole in there. All right. And that is going to, oh, too high because it's starting to poke out the edge. Bring it down a little bit. So that is going to remind me actually to take this one and make it just slightly taller. There we go. Okay, so now I have sculpture, the base, and I have this peg that's all going to fit together. So now we need to actually make these into meshes. So with a volume builder, what you also need is a volume mesher. So the volume builder goes into the volume mesher, and that is what creates it a form. Now, one thing you want to check with this, the other thing I wanted to add was, sorry about this, you can add a smooth layer to your meshes as well. So if you're in volume builder, make sure that's make sure that that is selected, click smooth layer, and that is going to smooth out any of the inconsistencies that you see there. Now notice it drastically changed my shape. So with smooth layer, click on this, you have different types of filters that you can use. You can also change the percentage. So if I went down in percentage, getting more of that form back, right? So that could be a simple way to modify. That looks pretty good. But if I went back to 100% here, you could also go from Gaussian to mean, which changes it a little bit. That actually looks a little bit better. Median, not much change. Medium curve is actually pretty good. That gives us pretty much what we had to begin with. I kind of like the Gaussian because it smooths out the layer a little bit more, and I'm just going to bring it down a little bit. Maybe 50% is pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. No expectations here. So that's what I'm going to work with there. And then I'm going to go to this one as well and add a smooth layer. That's going to smooth that down as well. This looks pretty good. And then I'll keep the peg as is. So volume mesher is here now, and what you want to do with volume mesher is just simply change quickly to shading with lines. And what you're looking for is how the polygons are. Now this one looks pretty good. If you were to click on this and it would look totally black, like totally condensed with polygons, it's probably way too many. And if you ever need to change that, you can go to the mesher and you can change the adaptive range here. So if I make this higher percentage, less polygons appear. It's going to actually be a smaller file size, which is important too when we start processing. But I like it. I think it's pretty good. I'm going to keep it how it is. So with that in mind, I'm going to go to the volume builder. Got the smooth layer on to the bottom base. Going to go here again and add a volume mesher. I'm going to bring this volume builder into that mesher. That's our base. Okay, and I'm starting to get a little confused, so I'm just going to double click this and call it the base. Okay, there we go. So that's looking pretty good. Those two. Okay, and so now when you're ready, what I like to do with these is actually I'll select everything here and copy it and paste it. So two versions, right? And then I can make editable these two that I just made. So make this editable. Okay, and now these are just polygon meshes, which is great. These ones we can hide. Save those for later. Okay. Now finally, I want this, and I want the base and the sculpture in my 3D print. So what I'm going to do is set this up so it's ready to create an STL that I can just simply bring right into a slicer program. So here, what I can do, I'm actually going to make this one editable too, so it'll be a little bit easier. And I'm going to go to the front view. Okay. And I'm going to zoom in here. And with the cylinder, I'm going to change on enable access. I'm going to bring this down right to the bottom. Now when you do this, I always like to zoom really close in just to see if I'm actually on the bottom. Not quite on the bottom, go up a little bit. That looks pretty good. Okay, turn this off once it's at the bottom. And here then, I'm just gonna make my Y 0. All right, so that's good. Okay, and then sculpture. Actually, let's work with the base first. I'm gonna just take the sculpture. That's not the sculpture. Take the sculpture and move it over a little bit. Here's the base. Same thing here. Got to turn on enable access. Gonna bring this down to the bottom. Just gonna center this. Zoom in really close. Make sure I'm really at the bottom of it. It looks pretty good. I'm gonna zoom back out. Turn this off. Take the Y, make it 0. We'll see now the base and the peg there are on the same axis. They're both sitting on the ground. Now, one thing about the, let's turn the shading off with lines. Okay, let's go back to this and just think about how this is going to 3D print. Okay, so this thing is not going to print very well in this orientation. What I'm actually going to do with this is I'm going to rotate it. Let's just rotate it down like that. We're going to rotate it basically 90 degrees. And in this orientation, it's going to print much better. May need a little bit of scaffolding, but that's not too big of a deal. Scaffolding or the bridging that it creates to kind of print underneath objects or in the voids. It may or may not need any underneath here, but I think in this orientation is probably the best to print. So I'm going to take this again, go back to my move, enable access, and I'm going to go to the rotation and hit 0 just to get that y-axis pointing back up straight again. So that's pretty good. I'm just going to bring this in a little bit closer. I might actually just rotate it a little bit. That looks pretty good. And then same with the peg. Just going to bring this in a little bit closer. Okay, and the last thing I want to check in that front view, looks like the sculpture is actually too low. So again, zoom in on this. All right, enable access, bring this down to the bottom, somewhere down there. Zoom in again, let's bring that down a little farther. It looks pretty good. Okay, zoom out, I'm gonna turn that off, take my Y here, make that 0. And now I've got these 3 objects all oriented on the Z, on the, base axis. And then finally, what I'm going to do here is just going to take these 3, and I'm going to copy them. Command N, make a new file. Command V. Let's check them out. They look pretty good. And then we'll think a little bit about scale. So the base is roughly just over an inch tall. We want it taller. I'm actually just going to scale this whole thing up. So if I hit Command D, scale project, if I make current scale 1, I can make target scale 2. And we're starting out for millimeters, and we're ending in millimeters. Hit OK. And notice now we've got 72 by 43 by 72. So that's about 3 inches tall. It's not too bad. I could probably print it a little bit bigger, but for what this is, I like the way that it is. I think we're going to go for it. So with this, I'm ready to create an STL. STL is what we're going to export to and bring into our slicer software. So for that, file, export, STL. I'm just going to label this 1 STL, save it somewhere, and we're ready to go. And that's about it. So again, let's just go back to this file. Sorry. Let's go back to this file and think a little bit about the volume meshers, right? So volume building, volume meshing allows you to create much more complicated forms You can use it to create different parts that fit together really easily, positive and negative forms. And from here, you can create really interesting complex forms. So anyway, that's it for now. That is Volume Builder, and I hope you can use it to make some really interesting 3D prints. That's all for now. See you later.